Beneath the silver hush of the moon, the lake slept. Its surface was smooth as a sheet of polished jade, broken only by the slow drift of mist that curled and twined like breath from some dreaming giant beneath the water. The air was cool, fragrant with the damp sweetness of lotus blossoms, and thick with the soundless weight of night. Here, the world seemed to exhale, and all that lived paused in the rhythm of its breathing. Lanterns from the riverside houses painted trembling gold trails on the dark current, their light wavering with each subtle sigh of the wind. In the distance, the wooden arch of a bridge rose and curved in graceful defiance against the soft gloom, its lacquered rails slick with dew. Beyond it, narrow streets slept in quiet patience, the wooden shutters drawn tight, the faintest aroma of incense still clinging to the eaves from prayers whispered at dusk. But the lake never truly slept. Beneath its mirrored skin, the world was different. There, silence was alive with movement, and shadows swam with purpose. Shapes that belonged to neither fish nor man traced their secret circuits in the dark water, their scales flashing white like hidden lightning before vanishing again into the depths. Sometimes, if you stood alone at the water's edge and let your breath match the rhythm of the ripples, you might feel the sudden prickle of awareness. Not fear exactly, but a knowing. The sense that eyes, ancient and patient, were fixed upon you. Old women in the market spoke of spirits in the lake, guardians or temptresses, depending on which stall you lingered by. They told stories of beings who could take the form of men or women so beautiful that the world itself bent toward them, unable to look away. These creatures, they whispered, were not like the ghosts of restless ancestors or vengeful shades. They were older, wilder. They lived by their own rules, as the moon lives apart from the sun. Most laughed at such tales, yet those who had walked the water's edge on certain nights when the mist lay low and the moon bled pale fire, spoke in softer voices afterward. They claimed to have heard something, the faint brush of silk over stone where no person walked, the sigh of a voice carried on the wind though no lips moved, or the sudden glimpse of white disappearing around the bend of a path where there had been no one a heartbeat before. It was on such a night, in the tremble between spring and summer, that the air over the lake seemed to grow thicker. The moon hung low, its reflection trembling with a strange anticipation. The water moved, though no wind stirred, its surface rippling outward in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, as though the lake itself had begun to breathe. The scent of lotus deepened, heady and intoxicating, laced with something sharper, like rain on stone. A sound rose from nowhere, soft, steady, like the pulse of a distant drum. It was not loud, yet it filled the chest of anyone who heard it, matching the beat of their own heart. Then, from the heart of the mist, something shifted. At first, it was only a paler shape in the gray, slender, fluid, almost part of the fog itself. But as it drifted closer to the shore, it gained weight, definition, a hint of movement in the water at its base, the shimmer of light along a curve that seemed too smooth for fabric, too alive for stone. If anyone had been there to see, they might have sworn the mist itself was shaping a woman, a form delicate yet unmistakable, swaying with the subtle grace of someone who belonged neither to land nor water. The air around her seemed warmer than the night, scented faintly with rain and something sweeter, like the memory of a touch. Her face was hidden, veiled in the mist, but there was the impression of eyes, dark, luminous, holding a depth that could drown or cradle. They lingered on the shore, unblinking, as though searching for someone. The drumbeat slowed, faded, and the air seemed to tighten, pulling inward, as if the night held its breath. A whisper passed across the water. It was not words, not exactly, more the feeling of words, the sensation of being called without sound. It might have been nothing more than the wind sliding over the lake. It might have been everything. The figure wavered, half real, half dream, until the mist thickened again, swallowing her. The lake lay still once more. Only the scent of lotus remained, heavier now, almost clinging to the skin. Far away, in the narrow streets that led to the water, the night carried on untouched. A lone fisherman mended his net by lantern light, unaware of the currents stirring beneath the surface of the world he knew. A pair of lovers walked beneath the drooping branches of a willow, their hands brushing, their hearts quick with laughter. None of them knew that a story had already begun, one older than their city, older than the stones beneath their feet.
For in the deep the white snake waited, not in the way mortals wait, with impatience or idle dreaming, but with the patience of rivers, of mountains, of creatures who measure time in the slow turning of seasons. She had seen centuries pass like clouds in the wind. She had seen dynasties rise and fall, lovers meet and part, promises kept and broken. And still she waited, not for a thing, but for a moment, the single perfect chord in the music of the world that would draw her upward, toward the shore, toward someone. On this night, she felt it nearing. Perhaps it was in the way the moon dipped low, spilling silver like spilled wine across the water. Perhaps it was in the way the wind seemed to pause, as though even the air leaned forward to listen. Or perhaps it was in the quiet ache that curled in the white snake's ancient heart, an ache she had not felt in lifetimes. The water stirred again. A ripple moved outward from the lake's center, widening, soft as breath. Beneath it, a long, pale shape cut through the dark like a sliver of moonlight freed from the sky. It moved with effortless grace, each motion flowing into the next, until it vanished beneath the shadow of the bridge. Above, the night returned to its stillness, but the lake knew, the wind knew, and in some hidden part of the city, perhaps even a certain heart knew, that something rare and dangerous had begun to move in the dark. And when beauty moves through the dark, it always leaves a mark.
The morning after the lake's strange stirring, the market streets bloomed awake in a rush of colors and sounds. Stalls spilled over with peaches blushed like dawn, baskets of fragrant herbs, bolts of silk that caught the sun in liquid waves. Voices wove together in a bright, messy tapestry, merchants calling out prices, children laughing, the sharp clink of copper coins changing hands. Among them moved Zhu Xian. He was not remarkable in the way a warrior might be, nor in the manner of a scholar, with scrolls tucked under his arm. His was a quieter presence, one that drew the eye only after the heart had noticed it first. His hair, long and dark, was tied neatly at his nape, though a few strands escaped to catch the light. His eyes, soft, attentive, carried the patience of someone who had spent much of his life listening more than speaking. He worked as an herbalist, and the scents of dried chrysanthemum, fresh ginger, and bitter ginseng clung faintly to him, as though they had chosen him as their keeper. He moved through the crowd with an unhurried grace, pausing often to greet familiar faces. His hands, steady, precise, handled each jar and pouch of herbs as though they held fragile secrets. To some, this gentleness made him seem vulnerable. To others, it hinted at a quiet strength that required no boasting. He had no reason to expect that his life, so measured and careful, would soon be swept into the current of something vast and dangerous. But the current had already chosen him. It was when he stepped out from the shaded awning of his shop, the sun spilling over the street in a shimmer of heat, that he saw her, Bai Su Shen. She came down the narrow road with the slow certainty of water finding its course. Her robe was the palest shade of green, so soft it seemed spun from the underside of willow leaves. Over it lay a gauzy layer that caught the light and shifted like mist as she moved. Her hair, long as a river's shadow, was bound high with a pin of white jade carved into the shape of a coiled serpent. Her face, there was something in it that seemed carved from an older world. Her skin was smooth and luminous, like porcelain warmed by touch. Her eyes were dark, but not in the way of storm clouds, dark like the deep center of a still pond, reflecting the one who dared to look into them. When her gaze touched Zhu Xian, the noise of the market seemed to slip a little further away. She was not alone. A younger woman walked beside her, carrying a small basket covered with silk. Her steps were light, and her smile quick and bright.
Shao King, though Su Xian would not know her name yet. There was something about the younger one's eyes, a glint like sunlight on a knife, but it was easy to miss beside the calm, magnetic presence of Bai Sujian. When she spoke, her voice was low and even, like the hum of rain on a summer night. It carried a warmth that invited closeness, yet something in it held distance, as though each word had traveled a long way to reach the listener. "Good morning, Master Herbalist," she said, stopping before Su Xian's stall. "I was told you keep the finest chrysanthemum flowers in the city." Her words were simple, but in the space between them lay something unspoken. Su Xian, usually so composed, felt his heart falter in its steady rhythm. He reached for a jar from the shelf behind him, and in doing so, his fingers brushed hers as he passed it across the counter. It was the lightest touch, accidental, gone in a breath, and yet there was a heat in it, delicate but undeniable, as if that brief contact had stirred some hidden ember in his chest. Her eyes lingered on him for a fraction longer than politeness required. "I also prepare infusions," he offered, his voice quieter than he intended. "If you'd like, I can blend one to your liking." A small smile curved her lips, not a smile for the market, but one that seemed to belong only to this moment. "That would please me, but only if you choose the herbs yourself."
As Shu Xian moved to gather the ingredients, Shao Qing's gaze flitted between them, her expression unreadable. Perhaps it was amusement, perhaps it was warning. When Bai Sujian and her companion left the stall, the space they had occupied seemed oddly empty, as though the air itself had shifted to follow them. Shu Xian stood for a moment, watching her figure drift away into the crowd, the pale green of her robe like a willow branch swaying in slow motion. Elsewhere in the city, another pair of eyes had noticed. At the temple on the hill, the monk Fa Hai was speaking with an acolyte when the first prickle of unease touched him. He could not yet name its cause, but he felt it as one might feel the change in the wind before a storm, a faint whisper of danger, not of swords or soldiers, but of something older, woven through the bones of the world. In his years of study, Fa Hai had learned to listen to such feelings. He stepped to the edge of the temple terrace, looking down at the city spread like a scroll beneath him. His gaze lingered on the distant glimmer of the lake, then on the winding streets that led from it toward the market. A white presence, the sensation whispered, hidden in plain sight. Back at the market, the day carried on as though nothing had changed. But for Shu Xian, the rhythm of his life had shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the first subtle pull of a tide. He thought of her often in the days that followed, not in the way one remembers a stranger's face, but as one remembers a scent or a melody that has wound itself into the body. The sound of her voice, the way her eyes had caught the light, these lingered in him, quiet but persistent. For Bai Sujian, their meeting was not chance. She had walked through lifetimes, held herself apart from the mortal world's fleeting joys and griefs.
And yet, when she had seen him standing beneath the shade of his stall, something within her had shifted. Not a sudden longing, but the recognition of a thread, a connection that felt as though it had been tied long before either of them had drawn breath. She would return. And when she did, the city would not be the same.
The days that followed blurred like ink in water, each one carrying the faint aftertaste of spring rain and something sweeter, something Shu Shan could not name. Bai Su John returned often to his stall, sometimes alone, sometimes with Xiao Qi at her side, always with request for herbs that seemed chosen less for their medical need than for the chance to speak with him. At first, their exchanges were measured, polite, carefully balanced as the weight of a teacup in the hand. Yet even in the quiet rituals of transaction, there were moments that caught and held. The way her eyes followed his hands as he measured out dried chrysanthemum, the way his voice softened, almost unconsciously, when he asked about her health, the brief pause before she accepted a pouch from him, fingers grazing his just long enough to send a shiver running through him. One afternoon, rain began to fall while she was still in his shop. It came suddenly, a silver curtain drumming against the awning, scattering the market in a flurry of hurried footsteps and closing shutters. Shu Xian moved quickly to bring in the jars and baskets from the stall's edge, but she lingered at the doorway, watching the rain with a faint, private smile. "You should wait here until it passes," he said, setting down the last of the jars. "It's heavier than it looks." Her gaze slid from the rain to him, slow as the movement of a cloud over the moon. "And if it doesn't pass quickly?" The question was simple, but the air between them seemed to band under it. "Then I suppose," he said after a moment, "I'll make tea." She stepped inside, the hem of her robe whispering over the floorboards, the scent of her, lotus and something sharper, something like rain striking stone, rose in the small space, mingling with the earthy fragrance of the herbs. He lit the brazier, the flame a small sun between them, and set water to heat. When he handed her the cup, their fingers touched again. This time neither of them looked away. Outside, the rain softened to a steady murmur, but neither seemed eager for it to stop. They spoke of small things, her travels, his work, but there was an undercurrent to every word, as if the true conversation was happening in the spaces between. It was Xiao Qi who broke the moment, slipping in from the street with a shake of her damp sleeves. Her eyes flicked between them, sharp and knowing. Shu Xian thought he saw the ghost of a smirk before she masked it with a polite bow. After they left, the shop felt emptier than usual, the sound of the rain now more lonely than soothing. High above the market, in the cool shadow of the temple, Fa Hai listened to the murmur of his acolytes. They spoke of small disturbances, dreams of serpents, strange ripples on the lake, the scent of lotus drifting where no flowers grew. He asked questions, quiet and precise, and their answers shaped a pattern he recognized too well. There were spirits in the city. The lake had always been a place of crossing, where mortal and spirit worlds touched. untouched, like the meeting of river and sea. Most such beings kept their distance from human lives, but some forgot the old boundaries. And when that happened, desire could turn to ruin. Fahai closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as though listening to a voice carried on the wind. There was no anger in his heart, only the weight of knowing what must be done. As spring deepened into early summer, Shu Shen found himself thinking less of his days before her, and more of how each morning might bring her back to his door. Their meetings grew longer, drifting beyond the pretense of herbal needs. He began to walk with her along the willow-lined path by the lake, where the air was cool and dappled with green light. One afternoon they paused beneath the largest of the willows. Its branches hung low enough to veil them from the path, and the world beyond seemed far away. Bai Shuzen reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from his face. Her fingers lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You're quiet today," she murmured. I'm wondering," he said. "About what?" He searched her face. "Where you came from, who you are, truly." For a moment, something unreadable passed through her eyes. Then she smiled, but it was a soft, guarded smile, as though it had been shaped over something fragile. "Does it matter?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Not to my heart." Her breath caught so softly he almost didn't notice, and then she looked away toward the shimmer of the lake through the willow leaves. If only he had known how close his wondering had come to the truth. But truth has a way of reaching those who seek it, and sometimes even those who don't. One evening, as the market closed and the lanterns bloomed along the streets, Fahai descended from the temple. His robe, the color of ash and smoke, brushed the stones with each deliberate step. He moved without hurry, yet people made way for him instinctively, their voices falling to murmurs in his wake. He stopped at Shu Xian's stall, looking over the jars and bundles of herbs without touching them. "You are Shu Xian," the monk said, his voice as even as still water. "Yes, master." Fahai's gaze was direct, steady. "You walk often with a woman dressed in pale green." Shu Xian felt the faintest tightening in his chest. "She is a friend." The monk's eyes narrowed slightly, though his tone remained calm. "There are spirits in this city. Some wear the faces of beautiful women. Some offer kindness. All have their own hungers." Before Shu Xian could reply, Fahai turned away, leaving only the quiet weight of his words behind. That night, Shu Xian lay awake, the monk's warning threading through his thoughts. Yet each time he remembered her face, her voice, the warmth of her hand in his, the warning seemed distant,
like the echo of thunder when the sky above was clear. The next time they met by the lake, he told her about the monk's visit. Her expression did not change, but a stillness came over her, the kind of stillness that belonged not to fear, but to decision. She stepped closer, her gaze holding his. "Do you believe him?" she asked. He shook his head. "I believe what I feel when I am with you, and that is enough." Her lips curved into a smile that was almost sorrowful. She touched his cheek, her fingers cool against his skin. "Then let us not speak of warnings. Let us only speak of what is ours, for as long as we can hold it." And in that moment, he could not imagine wanting anything more. But desire, once lit, burns towards its own end, and the wind was already shifting.
The summer heat lay heavy over the city, thick with the perfume of lotus drifting from the lake. Nights came slower now, reluctant to fall, as if they too wished to linger in the warm glow of the fading sun. Lo, he had been waiting, his figure half veiled by the drooping branches, the shifting leaves painting his face in shadows and light. She moved toward him, the silk of her robe whispering with each step, and when she stopped before him, the closeness between them felt like a held breath. "I missed you," he said, the words almost an exhale. Her eyes searched his face as though memorizing it, and there was a depth in her gaze tonight, a heaviness, as though she carried something she could no longer bear alone. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool at first, then warming as they entwined with his. They walked together to the water's edge. The lake lay still, its mirrored surface reflecting the swollen moon. A faint mist curled low, the same mist that had heralded her arrival in his life, though tonight it seemed thicker, more alive. They sat beneath the shadow of the bridge, where lantern light from the shore could not reach. For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of questions unasked, of touches almost made, of the knowledge that something was about to change. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled, though not from fear. "If I told you something that would make you see me differently, would you still want to look at me?" He turned to her fully, the faint light catching the sharp grace of her cheek, the curve of her lips. "There is nothing you could tell me that would take my eyes from you." Her breath hitched. Slowly she cupped his face in both hands, her palms cool against his flushed skin. He leaned into her touch as though it anchored him. The mist around them thickened, curling over the stones, rising until it swirled in luminous patterns against the moonlight. The scent of lotus deepened, intoxicating, mingling with something sharper, almost electric. "I am not what you think I am," she whispered. The words were a key turned in a lock neither of them could close again. Before he could answer, the surface of the lake shifted, ripples spreading from nowhere, lapping at the stones beside them. She released his face and stood, stepping toward the water. Her robe clung to her in the damp air, its pale green darkening like leaves in shadow.
The mist followed her, enfolding her figure until she seemed carved from it. The change began subtly, a shimmer along her skin, like light breaking through water. Then her hair loosened, spilling down her back in a wave of black silk, and beneath it, her form began to move in ways no human body could. Her shadow lengthened, twisted. The hem of her robe trailed into the water, where it no longer fluttered like cloth, but swayed, alive, as if it were part of her. Huxian's breath caught, his heart pounding loud enough to drown out the night sounds. His mind told him to step back, yet his body leaned forward, drawn to her still. The transformation came in a breath, a rush of light and motion, and where she had stood, a great white serpent now coiled, her scales gleaming like wet pearl under the moon. Her eyes, luminous and dark, held his as surely as her human gaze had. She was terrible and beautiful all at once, the kind of beauty that could both save and ruin a man. For a heartbeat, time stilled. The lake's surface was glass, the mist frozen in its curl, and in that suspended world only they existed. Then she moved, sliding closer. Her body was silent in the water, the coils shifting with a grace that made the air feel too thin. He should have been afraid, but what he felt instead was an aching pull in his chest, a longing that had nothing to do with reason. Yuxian, her voice came, still hers, though it seemed to echo from within him rather than without. This is what I am. He stepped forward, the stones cool beneath his feet. The serpent's head dipped, her gaze never leaving his. Tentatively, he reached out, his hand trembling, until his fingers met the smooth, cool silk of her scales. The contact sent a jolt through him, not of fear, but of recognition, as though he had touched something written into him long before his birth. "I see you," he said, his voice low, unsteady, "and I cannot turn away." The serpent shuddered, and in a rush of mist and motion, she was herself again, standing before him with tears in her eyes. Her breath came fast, her hands trembling as they rose to his face. "You don't understand what this means," she murmured, her forehead resting against his. "They will come for me. They will try to take me from you." "Then let them try," he said, his arms closing around her. "They will not succeed." The kiss that followed was not gentle. It was born of desperation, of the knowledge that they might already be running out of time. Her lips were cool at first, then warmed against his, and he felt her fingers tighten in his hair, as if to anchor herself to this single, fragile moment. Around them, the mist swirled higher, wrapping them in a cocoon of silver light. The scent of lotus clung to the air, heavy and sweet, and beneath it was the faint metallic tang of rain that had not yet fallen. Somewhere far away, a bell tolled from the temple, the sound deep and resonant, like a warning carried on the wind. Neither of them moved to part. The world beyond the mist could wait. For now there was only the fierce, fragile truth between them. Love that had crossed the line between mortal and spirit. Desire that burned even in the face of danger. But danger was already moving toward them, silent and certain, and the mist would not shield them for long.
The morning after the revelation broke with a thin veil of rain, the kind that draped the world in silver threads and softened every edge. Bai Zhu Zhen sat at the edge of their small courtyard, watching the droplets gather on the jade leaves of the potted orchids, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She had not slept. Su Zhen stirred within, the sound of his movements faint behind the paper walls. And though every part of her longed to go to him, to draw strength from his embrace, she could not quiet the weight in her chest. The monk had come in the night. Not in person, but in presence, a whisper of sandalwood on the wind, the echo of a mantra woven into the mist. She had felt him watching, his awareness like a cold thread through her thoughts. She knew then what was coming. Zhu Zhen emerged, his hair still damp from washing, his gaze seeking hers immediately. The moment he saw her face, he crossed the courtyard without hesitation, kneeling before her as if to anchor himself at her feet. He said, "We can leave," his voice urgent but low. "We can go where no one knows us. We'll vanish into the mountains. They will not find us." Her fingers lifted to his cheek, tracing the familiar warmth there. "They will always find me, Zhu Zhen. It is their way. And if they cannot bind me, they will try to harm you." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, then holding it against his heart. "Then let them harm me. I will not live my life without you." The rain thickened, each droplet ringing faintly on the roof tiles. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his, breathing in the warmth of him, the quiet thud of his heartbeat. "There is a way," she murmured, "but it will cost me more than you can imagine."
Before he could ask, a shadow moved at the gate. The air grew heavier, the rain suddenly hissing against unseen wards. The monk stepped through, Fahai, robed in ochre, his face carved in stern serenity. His eyes, sharp as the edge of a blade, took in the scene, the lovers kneeling in the rain, their hands still joined. "Bai Zhen," his voice carried the weight of mountains. "Your deception has gone on long enough. Come willingly, and I may spare him the suffering your kind always bring." Xu Xian rose, placing himself between them, his body a shield, though he knew it was futile. "She is not what you think. She is exactly what I think. A spirit in human skin, a serpent bound to desire. You will die if you stay with her." "Then I will die," Xu Xian said, and the certainty in his voice cracked the stillness. Fahai's expression did not change, but the beads in his hand began to turn, their quiet rhythm pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. Bai Zhen felt the pull immediately. the chant threading into her bones, calling to the part of her that was not human. The rain bent around them, swirling in strange arcs. She stepped forward, her robe darkened by water, her hair plastered against her neck. "Stop," she said, her voice a low tremor. "I will go with you, but you will not harm him." Xu Xian turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, no, you cannot." Her lips brushed his cheek, her whisper warm and aching. "If I stay, he will kill you. If I go, you will live. That is the only choice left." She kissed him then, slow and deep, tasting the salt of rain and the bitterness of parting. Her hands framed his face, memorizing the shape of him, the curve of his mouth, the warmth of his breath. When she pulled away, it was with a steadiness she did not feel.
Fahai's chant deepened, the air around her tightening. The mist rose from the ground, curling around her feet, climbing her legs like cold vines. She did not resist as it claimed her, her gaze fixed on Xu Xian until the last moment, her eyes telling him what words could not, that her love would not fade, even if her body was caged. The monk turned, leading her away into the rain. Xu Xian stumbled after them until an invisible force stopped him, pressing against his chest, holding him back as though the air itself had turned solid. He shouted her name, his voice breaking in the downpour, but she did not look back. By the time the force eased, they were gone. The courtyard felt impossibly empty, the orchids dripping silently in the rain. Xu Xian sank to his knees, the earth cold and wet beneath him, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The scent of lotus lingered faintly, impossible in the rain, as if she had left a part of herself behind. That night, he lit a single lantern and set it afloat on the river. He watched it drift, the flame trembling against the darkness, and whispered her name as though the wind might carry it to her. Somewhere far beyond the reach of mortal eyes, Bai Su Zhen felt it and turned her face toward the sound, her chains silent, her heart unbroken. Their love had been torn from the mortal world, but it was not gone. It lived in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the shimmer of moonlight on still water, in the way rain sometimes smelled of lotus when no flowers bloomed. It would live as long as they did, and perhaps longer still.
The river lay still beneath the silver sweep of moonlight, its surface catching fragments of light like scattered jewels. There was no sound but the gentle lapping of water against stone and the occasional whisper of wind threading through the reeds. In this quiet, one could imagine the world itself holding its breath, as if it too had paused to remember. The night was heavy with memory, and memory, in turn, was heavy with longing. It clung to the air, mingling with the scent of wet earth and the faint, lingering perfume of lotus flowers, the kind that only bloom in the hidden hours before dawn. These scents were more than fragrance. They were a language, speaking of things lost, things forbidden, things that once trembled between the touch of mortal hands and the grace of spirits. In the hush of that riverbank, one might see a faint shimmer beneath the water, a silvery undulation that hinted at life unseen. It was the shape of a serpent, coiled with elegance, slipping through liquid darkness. Its movement was hypnotic, a pulse of liquid light that traced patterns beneath the surface, as if it were painting the river with its presence alone. This was Bai Zujan, the white snake spirit, whose love had once burned like fire against the fragile world of men, and though she was bound by chains both visible and unseen, her essence had never been diminished. Love, she knew, could not be confined by walls of stone, nor by the rigid codes of those who feared what they could not understand. There is a price to passion always, yet it is a price willingly paid when the heart refuses reason. Husain had paid it too, in trembling breaths, in the ache of separation, in the infinite nights of yearning where one hand reached into empty air and found only the memory of warmth. And perhaps in some quiet eternity this price was not too great. For what is life without such a fire, even if it scorches and leaves scars? The bond between them had been forged not in safety or in certainty, but in risk, in the danger that only true desire brings. To love a being who is more than human is to understand at once the beauty and the peril of the unknown. It is to hold something exquisite and fragile, knowing that its very nature could undo you, yet unable to turn away.
The river mirrored the moon with a clarity that seemed unnatural, as if the water had borrowed the light from some higher, secret realm. It was here, in the reflection, that one could see the eternal truth of Bai Sujen and Su Xian's story, that love does not require possession, that passion does not demand permanence, and that longing itself can be a kind of immortality. Even as the chains of Fa Hai's judgment weighed upon her form, Bai Sujen's spirit remained untethered. She had become a memory in the mortal world, a whisper in the reeds, a shimmer in the water. And yet every pulse of the river, every moonbeam that struck its surface, carried the echo of her presence, a reminder that what is profound and beautiful can never be entirely extinguished. To witness love like theirs is to understand the dangerous elegance of desire. Su Xian had glimpsed the extraordinary, and in doing so had been transformed. Every mundane moment, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the soft murmur of a distant bell, the taste of tea on a quiet afternoon, was now imbued with the shadow of something transcendent. His heart knew the touch of a love that had danced on the boundary between mortal and divine, and that knowing reshaped him. He understood that some passions leave a permanent mark not on the flesh, but on the soul. They haunt the mind like a scent that lingers long after the flower has withered, like a melody that plays endlessly in the quiet corners of memory. There is a particular beauty in what is forbidden. The very act of reaching towards something that cannot be fully held heightens the senses, sharpens awareness, and makes each stolen moment radiant with significance. Bai Sujian's allure had been undeniable. The softness of her skin, the silken fall of her hair, the shimmer of white robes like mist curling around her form. Yet it was not merely her physical beauty that ensnared Su Xian. It was the magnetism of her essence, the tremulous edge of her danger, the intimacy of knowing that to touch her was to touch a world apart from ordinary existence. And in that intimacy lay the very marrow of human longing, the desire to grasp what is impossible, the thrill of loving against the current of destiny, the exquisite torment of knowing the price and paying it willingly. Even now, as she remained imprisoned beyond his reach, their love lingered like a pulse beneath the skin of the world. The river, reflecting moonlight like shards of frozen time, seemed to thrum with it. Every ripple was a word unspoken, every eddy a sigh carried from her lips to his ears across the distance of space and circumstance. Love, in its truest form, does not end with separation. It transforms, becoming invisible yet indelible, like the memory of warmth left in a room long after the fire has died. The human heart, fragile and finite, grasps for permanence in a world defined by impermanence. It reaches toward beauty, clings to desire, seeks to hold what cannot be held. And yet, perhaps the lesson of Bai Sujian and Xu Xian is that permanence is not the point. To feel fully, to love deeply, even for a brief time, is to touch eternity. It is to know what it means to burn, to tremble, to be undone and remade by another soul. In that, there is a sweetness that neither death nor judgment can erase. There is also a reflection here on the nature of danger and attraction. Humans are drawn to what tempts and threatens, to what whispers both delight and peril. Bai Sujian embodied that duality, the soft caress of moonlight and the sharp glint of fangs, the gentle laughter and the threat of power that could crush a man if misjudged. Desire, when tinged with risk, becomes electric. It pulses, it calls, it lures the heart beyond safe shores. And it is precisely this interweaving of beauty and danger that renders love unforgettable, that makes the story haunt the listener long after the last word has been spoken. There is an inevitability to the lessons of such a tale. The river will continue to flow, the moon will rise and fall, and the White Serpent will slip silently beneath the water, as if the world had never noticed, as if the moment had never existed. But it has existed. Every soul who glimpses it carries a spark of the story forward. Every whisper of wind through the reeds, every silver gleam on the river, every sigh in the night is a testament to a love that defied the ordinary, that burned brightly and deeply, and that will echo through the quiet corridors of the heart forever.
And so, in the hush of the night, one might hear it, the soft, seductive undulation of a serpent beneath the water, the echo of a heartbeat stretched across worlds, the quiet reminder that love is never fully gone. It persists in memory, in longing, in the fragile spaces between what is seen and what is felt. Even in absence, it commands presence. Even in silence, it sings. It teaches that what is truly profound is not always meant to be grasped, only to be experienced, only to be carried forward in the heart, like a precious, dangerous flame. The final image is simple, yet infinite. A river flowing under the eternal gaze of the moon, white scales glinting beneath the surface, a spirit moving with grace that defies human perception, and a man standing at the bank, hand outstretched, eyes shining with the quiet ache of remembrance. The wind stirs, the water ripples, and in that fleeting intersection of worlds, mortal and immortal, human and spirit, desire and danger, there is the essence of all that is timeless. It is a story without end, a passion without closure, a longing that will haunt the soul as long as the moon rises and the rivers run. We leave them there, not in despair, but in a state of suspended beauty, where the lesson is not simply sorrow or separation, but the transcendence of love itself, to witness, even in imagination, the touch of the forbidden, the mingling of fear and desire, is to understand the fragile, radiant, and eternal nature of the heart. It is to recognize that some stories are meant to linger like the aftertaste of honey on the tongue, like the last sigh of wind through autumn leaves, like the silver shimmer of a white serpent beneath a river under moonlight, forever present, forever unseen, and forever unforgettable.